What is your major malfunction? Didn't Mommy and Daddy show you enough attention when you were a child?
Let's play this backwards and see if it gets any better.
Let's get down to business. What do you say?
Show me the money!
Always be closing. Always be closing.
You're now listening to Boots to Business with Daniel Hrabowski.
And welcome, everybody, to Boots to Business. My name is Daniel Hrabowski. You can listen to us every Sunday on WFLA Orlando from 5 to 6 p.m. on FM 93.1, 94.1, 107.7. Online at any of the socials, or you can find us at www.boots-to-business.com. This first part of today's show is brought to you by the Insurance Claims HQ, powered by the Hair Shannara Trial Attorneys. Their commitment is to help make you whole again after a disaster. Call 844-252-4684. Visit them at insuranceclaimhq.com. So today, as usual, I have Melissa Jacob from Striking Brand as my co-host.
Hello.
And we have a great guest today. His name is Eric Oberembt. Did I get it?
Yeah, close enough.
And Eric is one of the co-founders of Roofers in Recovery, the host of the Be Authentic or Get the F Out podcast, and a list of other things that you do. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And so, Melissa, Eric and I did his podcast this morning at a roof convention here in Orlando, and we spent a good chunk of that talking specifically about trauma, PTSD, and how to overcoming some of those things. And we kind of tail end of it, we started living in the space talking about leadership development. And one of the things that Eric's doing that I think is phenomenal is the cult culture movement. Right?
Correct.
And the idea behind it is to help people who are in leadership positions be better leaders, correct?
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit more about that, and like, what's the overall intent and the goal, and where'd you come up with the idea?
So I learned a handful of years ago that I couldn't become a better leader until I actually focused on myself. Mm-hmm. And I started joining some different groups and joined a couple of different masterminds. And I went on a couple of retreats that were very small and intimate, kind of like they were groups before they became these blown up groups, right? Of 100, 150 people in them. And when I joined, there was like 15, 20 of us. And we went on this first trip that I went on to Mexico, went to Puerto Vallarta, and I was around a group of men who had an opportunity that was facilitated by Sam Taggart, a friend of mine, and we all were very vulnerable and got to know each other in a way that you don't normally get to just running into a conference and saying, hey, how you doing? How are the wife and kids? And that retreat completely changed my life and the trajectory of how I lead and how I do business and how I treat employees and just how I do everything. And it was such a powerful thing. And I've stayed connected in all of these different groups, but it's kind of like, going into the Roofers in Recovery thing, it's kind of like, as a alcoholic, an addict, whatever, I'm always, if you ever drink again, people that relapse, they're always chasing that first time. They're always chasing like what that feeling was the first time. Like, do you remember when you got drunk the first time at 20 years old? It was great, right? I decided I was chasing that moment in time of when there was 15, 20 men and we were in this group and we all changed each other's lives. And I was like, well, if no one else is going to do that again, I'll do it. Right. So I literally started the group because I wanted to recreate that moment in time that changed me, but I'm doing it the Eric way. And the Eric way is a little bit different than the Hunter way or the Sam way or whatever. A lot of it's the same, but a lot of it's different. And so I want to be the one that facilitates that and help these men grow into the leaders that they're supposed to become by working on themselves and finding out where their vulnerabilities are and like where their weaknesses are and where their strengths are so that we can double down on those and make them better.
Well, and you see now there's been this big push the last probably year or two about the mental health in general, right? And I think what you're focusing on is a unique group of people, right? Because there is the general rule of thumb of mental health, and it's like we should take it into consideration. We need to have empathy for the certain people. But when you're talking about people who have experienced trauma, have experienced addiction, are in leadership positions or want to be in leadership positions within the companies that they're in, the dynamic is different. That was one of the things that we touched on this morning was, who do you talk to, right? And so unless you get a group of people who have been through something similar, the idea of being able to be open and transparent and vulnerable is really hard to do, because you end up getting judged, right? And so I think
people can't relate,
right? Or they think they can, and then it becomes kind of this like one-up conversations, like, well, I did this, and they're like, well, I did that twice, and then and when you get in a group with people who, if their intention is to grow and to develop and be supportive, you're not going to receive that judgment.
Right.
It's not going to become that one-up thing.
What's really interesting is that after you and I filmed this morning, I interviewed another gentleman, Patrick Carr, and it was really funny. We had no intention of this happening, but like that conversation that we had kind of bled into that one, and he brought up this really good question, really, because he's an interviewer, right? So he's having a really hard time just answering questions. So like he literally comes on my show and starts interviewing me. It was actually great though. Like it worked out really well. But he asked a question because of a failed relationship that he had with a former like girlfriend, and asked who we share that with, because he thought he was sharing, but he was coming home and like laying this pile of crap on his significant other, but then trying to be the man and the provider after that.
Right.
And it was like eventually she just got fed up with hearing what seemed like whining at a certain point, right? And was like, this doesn't work. And he asked a question like, how do you balance that? And the answer was, I don't, because I know that I can't give all that to her, right? And so I know that I have to find a group of people that understand what I'm going through so that I can share it with them. And maybe that's a coach or a mentor or somebody that I pay to be there to listen and have a transactional relationship with as well, because I know they're going to be there because I'm paying them to be there.
And sometimes transactional relationships do work.
Yes.
Right. I think, especially in our industry, a lot of times everybody's like, no, I want it to reciprocate. If it's a transactional relationship, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with it. But I think in a professional development and a mental health capacity, transactional is sometimes what you need, right? Because you don't want to burden the people who are close to you, the people that you love, with the things that are weighing you down. You got to put it out somewhere, right? And unfortunately, people in this world, a lot of times, if you put that out there into a public forum, it can get used against you later. And you obviously want to make sure that you're not so open to everybody. But
people need to stop putting that on public forums.
Well, number one.
Let's just stop doing that,
because they get the attention though, and that's the thing.
That's why they do it.
And no, that's it. And that's frustrating me when I see a lot of these posts on social media and about people dealing with whatever it is. If it, it's like, cool, man, we all have depression, we all have anxiety, we all have tension in our lives. Like, what you're going through is normal. It's called being a human.
Right.
If it's so bad that you feel like you need to vent it, then find the appropriate avenue to do that.
And that's why they have Facebook groups.
Yeah.
Right?
They're specific for that.
They're specific for that. And it's where we can share maybe those things. Like that we have a Roofers in Recovery Facebook group, right? And I encourage people to put those things in there, because somebody might see that and want to reach out and help and, lend a hand or whatever. But if you're doing it on the open market, it's going to get misconstrued. It's going to turn into something that you maybe didn't want it to turn into, because now you are going to start getting judged by trolls and other people that don't really care about how you're doing.
Well, it's not very productive either. It's just you're just putting it out there. So
Yeah, and so, and we'll dive in a little bit more than that on that when we come back from the break. And I want to kind of live in that space where we're talking about the portrayal of trauma and stress. So this is Boots to Business. My name is Daniel Rabowski. We will be back right after this commercial break.
We now return to Boots to Business with Daniel Rabowski.
And welcome back to Boots to Business. My name is Daniel Rabowski. This part of today's show is brought to you by Shield Tech Roofing Solutions. Discover Shield Tech Roofing Solutions, your premier destination for commercial roofing excellence. When it comes to protecting your commercial property, trust in their top-tier roof coatings and expert repair services. Explore their specialized solutions at shieldtechroofing.com and choose Shield Tech for lasting, high-quality commercial roofing solutions. Today in studio with me, as always, is Melissa Jacob from Striking Brand.
Hello, hello.
And we have a guest today, Eric Oberembt.
Yep.
I'm going to get it better, I'm hoping, as the day goes on. So before the break, we were talking about, we were starting to get down into the soup, so to speak, of avenues to be able to discuss whatever issues that people are having. And a lot of times it's the outlet is about anxiety or depression or trauma or stress in general. And we were talking about how there's different Facebook groups for these things. Do you see true vulnerability in some of these groups? Or does it seem like a fishing expedition sometimes? Because I think sometimes that's what happens, is there's an avenue for these people to use things, and then those attention seekers end up in those avenues too, and then it becomes that kind of fishing, hunting trip. It's like, well, are you really dealing with this? And if you are, maybe do something different, because you're taking away from the people in here who are truly being transparent and authentic with what's going on.
I think you get a lot of both, and the trick is trying to, because a lot of people are scared and fearful of calling somebody. Like, that phone is really heavy to pick up, right? Sometimes if you're trying to call somebody for help, but what's not heavy is type, right? So
Enter and it's gone.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot less fear in that. So I think that there are people that are genuinely like, this is my way of reaching out. I hope that someone sees it and reaches back out to me so that I can have a meaningful conversation with them. But then you have that flip side of people that are just looking for attention, right? Like people that post things that are like, "Ooh, that was a bad day."
With no context.
And leaves it there. And
I
it's
hate
like,
that.
"Oh,
They'll say like,
shut up.
"Hey, pray for me." And then
Well,
that's it. And it's
maybe I don't want to.
I'm
Maybe
not
praying for
I'm
it.
not asking you why. Like,
Right.
I'm never going to ask you why. Ever. It's not going to happen. But I think that there's people that genuinely, like, they're so scared that that's their only way to get that emotion out or that feeling out, in the hopes that somebody sees it. And so that's the hard part, because you want to be able to be there as somebody that's trying to help people.
Yep.
But weeding that garden that's a tricky play.
Well, because as soon as you engage, you're stuck. Because you can't just exit.
I know.
You can't be like, oh, well, you're talking about your you know, the neighbor's cat died.
Yeah.
That's really inconvenient for you. So cool, I'm out. But now you're the asshole, right?
Yeah,
And
but
so-
I've learned I'm okay with that. Like, because if I figure it out, like, I mean, that is the nice thing though. I'm on social media. Like, you can just not respond anymore. If I'm sitting in a conversation with you and you're like just draining my energy, it is a lot harder to get away from that conversation.
I did that a lot this morning. I kept getting sucked into conversations, and then as soon as there was an opportunity to be like, oh, there's so-and-so, and I would just dip.
I've literally worked with my coach on how do I do that.
Yeah.
And like, we've spent hours. I'm like, how do I get out of these conversations? And like, we literally role played so that I could learn how to be better at walking away, because I used to be the guy that would literally just turn my back on you to see if you would get the point and go away.
I'm like the complete opposite.
You're
I would
gonna
just
stay there
sit
forever.
there and talk.
Just keep talking to the back of my head. Yeah.
4 hours later, Melissa's still sitting there going,
Yeah. I was like, I think there's a better way to do this. Could you
Right.
teach me? And he's
see,
like, yeah.
I live somewhere in the middle of both of those. I'm actively looking for an escape all the time.
All the time.
And then, like, it happened to me this morning where there was a couple people that I haven't talked to in years and don't care to talk to.
Yeah.
And I got sucked into the conversation because I was talking to somebody else. And then all of a sudden they're like, let's all get together for a picture. And I was like, I don't want, I'm still here. And then as soon as they said, they turned the cameras back to give the phones, I was like, I disappeared like a shadow in the night. They turned around and they were like, where's Daniel?
You're the guy in the bar that everybody's like, where'd Daniel go?
Oh, yeah, no.
What do they call that in Irish?
Irish goodbyes.
Yeah, Irish goodbyes.
Oh, I'm so good at it.
Yeah.
Amy and I both, we have a thing where we have like eye contact rules. Like, I'll look over and be like,
Yeah.
and then we're done.
And we're done.
No questions asked. With it, like, there's not a let me finish this drink, let me finish this conversation. It's like,
It's time.
We're going.
Yep, wrap it.
And I've left her places and she's left me places. I'm
Really?
like, nope, we're going. I'm going. If you're not coming with me.
When I'm
better
ready,
get
I'm
your-
ready.
Yep.
Yeah, when I'm ready, I'm ready.
Funny.
But that's, again, I mean, we talk about roll back to the stress and anxieties and things like that. You get put in positions that make you feel uncomfortable. And let's say you're already having that kind of trauma-filled day where some of that stuff's weighing heavy on your heart and your head, and then all of a sudden you're getting the, what do they call them, the social vampires, right? They're just pulling all of that out of you, and you have to escape. I used to have a thing where I tell people in the very, very beginning, I'm like, listen, I am an extroverted introvert. I have a social meter, and as soon as that thing hits the low fuel light, I'm out. So if we're in the middle of a conversation and I just dip, don't take offense to it. That's me saying my meter is done. I am out of gas. Nothing good is going to happen from this point forward. You know, and I think you have to develop those things.
Interesting. I call myself a trained extrovert.
I like that.
So I am naturally an introvert. I get recharged by being alone and like taking my thoughts and breathing and, you know, like getting away, and that's how I get recharged. But I have to be, with everything that I do, I have to be an extrovert in a lot of the moments of my life, but I have to be able to have the other one. So like I think it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Is what you're saying. Yeah. But I don't remember where I heard that. I don't know, Lexi, if you remember where we heard that, but I heard the phrase and I'm like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
That's 100% me. Like that's who I am. And I'm going to identify as that now. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's easy to gravitate to a person like that because most people are probably that way.
That's what I think.
And the true like massive extroverts become salesmen. They're selling you on your time. They're selling you on whatever conversation they're having. And for a lot of people, that's hard. I don't want to be sold all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So then they gravitate to people like you and I because we're relatable. And I can be like, listen, I'm not interested in this conversation. And we can either segue to something else or we can just kill it.
I would agree with that. I think that is true. I never really thought of it that way. I think that more people are that way than what we think. And then you end up gravitating towards the people that are the same build as you, right?
Yeah. And, you know, it's like we were talking this morning, like I've always kind of been this way where I don't separate types of things, right? So I like trauma specifically. I don't separate trauma. And we had a long conversation about that this morning. And when I talk about being in public spaces, I think there is that element of like, well, how much can you give today? And how much did you charge last night? And what did your home life take away from you? And the thing is, the people who are biting for your time, that's not in their consideration.
Right.
They're not taking that into account. So you still have to show up. You still have to smile. You have to tell people whatever it is that you're there to do. But it truly takes it out of you a lot of times, for sure.
I've gotten to a point where I'm trying to be mindful of that and then just being honest about it too. And I'll tell people, be like, look, like I get drained. I'm going to be 100% intentional with you tomorrow or later this evening after I can recharge. But like right now, just so you understand, I'm not being rude. I'm just depleted of energy, and it's not your fault. And it's not anything that you did. And shockingly, like you get a pretty good response. You're like, oh my God, like, thank you for telling me.
I was going to say that actually sounds not shocking to me. That sounds like if that communication's there, then you kind of set that out there. And so you don't take it personally.
Right.
Because people probably do that. Take it personally. Like,
Sure.
oh, he thinks I'm boring. He doesn't want to talk to me.
And maybe
or
you are
something.
boring. And maybe I don't want to talk to you, but
Also that.
yeah.
But I think there's value in that though. And I think, again, it's one of those kind of shifts in psyche over the last couple of years where being open and transparent with people tends to be received a lot better. I think our generation was raised in you respond when somebody talks to you, make eye contact. No, I don't want to talk to that person. I'm going to be very transparent. Hey, I'm out of gas. Had a crap day.
Yep.
I've done X, Y, and Z, whatever it is that is not, you're not getting the best version of me. And I do that. Amy and I do that at home.
Really?
And if we're halfway through a day and she'll come in and she'll hit me with something, I'll be like, babe, today, I understand, but today's not the day. I don't have the capacity mentally to deal with whatever this problem is. So we'll dive into some more of that when we come back from the break. This is Boots to Business. My name is Daniel Rabowski. You can listen to us on WFLA Orlando, Sunday, 5 to 6 p.m.
We now return to Boots to Business with Daniel Rabowski.
And welcome back to Boots to Business, everybody. My name is Daniel Rabowski. In studio with me today is Melissa Jacob from Striking Brand.
Hello, hello.
And Eric Oberempt from Roofers and Recovery. Be authentic or get the F out.
That was the best one yet.
Yes.
Yeah, good job.
All right, this portion of the show is brought to you by my tongue twister sponsor, Golden Temple Builders. Got it. Bringing decades of expertise to commercial renovations and remodels, their commitment to you is clear written pricing options tailored to your project. Visit them at goldenTempleBuilders.com or call them at 321-508-0815 and let them help build your vision together, serving Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and Costa Rica. So before the break, we were talking about kind of the drain of your social meter and how a little bit more open people are to that honesty and that transparency. Have you seen that evolution? So let's roll back a little bit. So when did Roofers and Recovery start? When did you guys start that?
About 4 years ago.
Is that all? I thought it was a lot older than that.
What is it, 2023?
Yeah.
It was right during COVID.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, for whatever reason, I thought that was a little bit longer standing thing.
We started right before COVID,
Okay.
like the idea and everything, and like started sending a couple people to treatment. But then right during COVID, because that was when Zoom meetings became big. And so we started having Zoom recovery meetings during COVID. And we had huge attendance because nobody was going to in-person meetings
Right.
anymore. So like we had a lot of people coming to our meeting at the time.
So have you seen success in being part of that? And then, because are you active in that now, like as active as you were then, or have you kind of transitioned away from that to do the cult culture stuff?
No, I'm still active in it in the respect of the recovery side of it. There's so many facets of Roofers and Recovery now because it's grown to a place where we're buying recovery centers.
Wow.
Oh.
And people are going to end up being sent to the recovery centers, whether they're coming from Roofers and Recovery or not. So at its core, Roofers and Recovery is a nonprofit. We raise money throughout the year to send people to treatment that are in the roofing space because that was who we niched down to, because the roofing space is what gave back to us. And so we're like, these are the people that we want to help, because without recovery and without roofing, we'd all be poor and dead. Right. So that was why we chose that, to give back. But now with the locations opening up, those locations are going to be open to anybody, right? Like it's not just Roofers and Recovery clients, that are going to go there. It's going to be, so like, I'm not super involved in that side of the business. I'm involved in the other side and more the recovery side of making sure that we're recruiting new people that need help to, come to our meetings to help raise money, because it costs $15,000 to $20,000 every time we send somebody to treatment, right? And so raising the funds for that. So I still stay very involved. I still attend probably 80. Do you know how hard it is, by the way, that I haven't cursed this whole time?
You're
no,
doing
I've been watching.
fabulously.
Holy cow.
I've been watching.
I have stopped myself so many times. Like, I am so impressed with Eric right now.
You just wanted to do a little shout out to myself.
Shout out to myself.
Yeah, I needed to give myself some props because, wow.
Get through this next segment.
Wow.
There was 2 times I was like, here comes the F-bomb, and then you just skated right over it, and I was like,
man,
perfect.
I tell people that I can do it, but they don't believe me.
So now you have proof. It's on
yes,
video.
like it's on video. So wow.
Yeah, the only person to say a swear word today, this guy.
Yeah, I know. And you made me so mad too, because I'm like, oh, that's mine. So yeah, but anyway, I am still actively helping. I had to go on a tangent there because like it was like building up. Like I just want to yell. Ah.
I love it. It's hard though, because I was on another radio show and I accidentally dropped an F-bomb and the host goes,
Oh no!
just like
you got the dead
stonewalled
stare?
me, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Hey man, they can beep that. Let's just keep on going."
Keep a rolling.
Right.
He froze in his tracks and just stared
Oh,
at me, and I was
geez.
like, "Oh."
I'm
okay."
just so used to being on my own show,
Right.
where I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, and nobody can.
Yeah, it's your show.
Yeah, it's my
Yep.
show, and yeah. So anyway, but thank you for having me here. But
He's gonna leave here and get in the parking
Yeah,
lot.
just say all
and
the cuss
what's,
words.
just gonna curse like
It's gonna be
get
Jim
that on,
Carrey and Liar Liar.
Yes, just get
having
that
a
on film,
meltdown.
Yeah.
Lex. Wow.
Well, so now with the cult culture movement,
Yes.
is it still somewhat exclusive to the roofing community, or is this just in general?
It's anybody
Anybody.
that's in leadership roles, right?
Okay.
Obviously, I'm micro famous in roofing, so like that's obviously where I'm going to start, and that's where people are going to be attracted to me because they already know who
Right.
I am. RoofCon is like my family, so like when I come here, everybody knows who I am. So this is kind of where I wanted to launch it.
Very cool.
Right. But my ultimate goal is like, I don't want 15 roofers. Right. I'd love to have like some real estate people or some, I don't care what you do. If you have a team and you have people that you're responsible for, those are the people that I want in the group to be able to help up level. Right. The only caveat is that it's only men.
Gotcha.
Right. I've been in groups where like they would bring in spouses or women or whatever, and it just made it weird for the guys because they didn't feel comfortable sharing.
I could see that.
Right?
100%.
Yeah. And because not only are you being transparent to you, if I open up, I'm being transparent to you. And if you're my spouse, I get to go home and listen to the whole car ride home and be like, you never told me.
Yeah.
You did what? Like, it just doesn't work. I get it. Like, as these groups grow larger, you got to include spouses and you got to do all these things. But again, it loses what the original intent was, is being able to be vulnerable and say things that, maybe you were ashamed of, or, whatever it is, and being able to give that to the world and give that to another human. Again, it goes back to AA at step 5, right? I mean, literally in step 4, we write a list of all the crap that we've done in our whole lives. It's horrible. And step 5 is share it with another human.
No, I don't want to.
Most free. Nobody. So it's funny. Everybody always says that in the beginning, right? And there's a reason why the steps are in order, because once you go through 1, 2, and 3, you're ready for 4.
That makes sense. And there really should be some sort of, I don't want to call it a 12-step program, right? But some sort of step program for service members.
Yeah.
Our exit is the biggest crock you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Just like a drop off.
So you spend, for me, I know I can only speak to my own self, right? So you go around to all these little places on post and you're just getting signatures, right? And then on your way out, you sit through a class to teach you to write a resume. And then they just let you out into the world. And I remember my first VA appointment, the lady was talking to me and she was being very condescending. And I said, listen, you guys take a bunch of adults or children, take a bunch of kids, send them to war, let them experience the things that they've experienced, the trauma, the homesickness, the, whatever. And then you just kick them out the door into the civilian world, who by and large has a hero complex and thinks everybody that come out of the military has done something heroic somehow.
Right.
We're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're not allowed to have feelings. And then we either get that version or we get the everywhere you go, you have a gun in your hand version, right? So every room I walk into, I'm a murderous monster that has guns, or
Which
I'm a
you
hero.
are.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Or I'm a hero, right?
Right.
And 99.9% of people who have ever served live in the middle, right? But they don't have anything for vets. You know what they do? They go to a counselor who just sits there and screws off on their computer the whole time you're talking, and they're like, our hour's up. Do you feel good about today?
Oh,
No.
Wow.
I don't. And so I stopped going to them for a long time. But then you start to realize, I have to actually participate in this stuff if I want the VA to do this stuff. But I think that type of thing needs to exist and for service members. And, that's going to be one of the points that I touch on my speech on Saturday, is how much the veteran community impacts the roofing and construction community. Because there's a huge percentage of people who are in this industry who are prior service people, because we don't fit into a lot of molds. We don't fit into that 9 to 5 mentality a lot of times.
I've really tried to figure out how to. I've got a couple of people that have worked for me over the years that were veterans, and it's funny because this is showing my ignorance, right? I kind of put them all into the same mold of thinking that they would show up and be very detail oriented, task oriented, right? And like integrators kind of. And wow, that's
not even close.
No, that's not true. Like one of them was, right? Like I had a gal that started, she did 20 years in the military, and she came in and she was exactly that. But then you bring in guys that are sales guys and they're not.
Right. And there is that common misconception a lot of times. And I'll want to spend some time talking about that when we get back from the break. This is Boots to Business. My name is Daniel Rabowski. You can listen to us every Sunday on WFLA Orlando.
We now return to Boots to Business with Daniel Rabowski.
And welcome back, everybody, to Boots to Business. My name is Daniel Rabowski. This portion of today's show is brought to you by Coastal Claims Services, your trusted partner in public insurance adjusting, headquartered here in Florida, serving clients nationwide. They specialize in property insurance claims, and when it comes to protecting your home or your commercial business or ensuring that you receive a fair insurance settlement, call Coastal Claims and visit them at www.coastalclaims.net and let them help you get a hassle-free property insurance claim. I'm sorry, I screwed that one way up. But in the studio, Melissa Jacobs, Striking Brand.
Yep. Hello.
Eric Oberempt with every company known to man.
Yeah, just go with that.
And so before we took a break, we were talking about the misconception of service members and how that is that. And I've talked about that quite a few times on the show, is that there is this weird expectation for us when we get out that we're just a monkey that can push a button, right? Tell me what to do. I'm going to do that task, and that's it. What people don't realize is that I have guys that I wouldn't trust to bag my groceries at Walmart that wore the same uniform that I did.
I also thought that they would be more, or I stereotyped as more think outside the box.
Yeah.
As well, because I'm like, you have to be, right? Like, you have to figure out, again, wrong.
Yeah. Well,
because everybody doesn't fit one mold, right? But like you do that.
Yeah. And
like,
you're identifying traits that we all can have, and that people who spend any time in and have been in austere situations have to, right? So you take somebody like me, I'm going to do that. I'm going to function very well when I'm left alone to solve a problem, and you don't have to put all these constraints on me to accomplish a task.
Right.
And there's a ton of dudes like me. That doesn't mean it's the norm. And I think that's the problem. And there's so many differences. I mean, whether you served in the Army or the Marine Corps or the Air Force or the Navy. Like my brother's a major in the Air Force, and Amy's brothers were both Marines. And I can have the same conversation with all of my brothers and brothers-in-laws here, and we're all going to look at it differently because the Air Force is a corporation. They all call each other by their first names. It's awful.
I didn't know that.
Like, hey, Steve. Like, I'm like, who's
My dad
Steve?
was in the
Who's
Navy.
Steve?
I know people in the Army and Marine Corps, so I've never heard of that.
So the
weird.
Army, everybody goes by their rank,
Yeah.
and except for pilots. Pilots all call each other by their first names. And in the Marine Corps, they have their ranks, but then they have nicknames for some of their ranks, but you can only call them by the nickname if they've given you permission to call them by the nickname. I got in trouble by an E7, which in the Marine Corps is a gunnery sergeant, and the nickname is Gunny.
Yeah.
Right? You could, apparently, didn't know this, you can only call a gunnery sergeant Gunny if he gives you permission to call him Gunny. Well, me being a dumb Army guy, we're on a combat outpost in Baghdad, and I walk into his office, and I'm like, hey, Gunny, I need this. And he looked at me, and I got the most...
You got that death stare.
I can't swear on my show. There was a lot of those, a lot of all of the words. And I got kicked out of his office, and I was like, what in the world just happened? And one of the Marines was like, did you call him Gunny? And I said, is that not what I'm supposed to call him? And they're like, no, you messed up. And but
I'd have loved to have been in that
it
room.
was so bad. I mean, it's like midnight in South Baghdad.
Right.
It's a blackout fob, so the only lights that you can have are red lights because they don't carry, they don't show. And so this dude's screaming at me, and I'm like, "You're gonna get a shot."
And I'm assuming you don't really get an opportunity to go back and apologize either.
And you don't get to stop him in the middle of it.
No,
and that's one thing that I wish did carry over from the military to the civilian world is that if you are in a position of authority, that like no nonsense, like there's always this kind of running thing, like you may disagree with it, but I need you to do it, and we can talk about it later.
Yeah,
and that is lost in the civilian world.
Yeah.
And sometimes because a lot of times the person on the receiving end of that order doesn't need to know why I need you to hop, skip, and a jump on your left foot.
And sometimes they do.
Right.
But sometimes they don't.
Yeah. And we have ample time to talk about it afterwards.
Right.
Right. And that's something that I really wish did carry over, because sometimes I find myself talking to people and then I get interrupted. And it's like, I'm cool once.
Right.
And then stop it. And it's always an interesting dynamic. And I think veterans have a place in this world, but then there's also kind of where we were talking about the different branches. There's also different ranks and different jobs and all these other things. A guy who is a cook, an E2 cook, you can't expect the same thing out of that person as you do an E7 or an E8 or a sergeant major that was in charge of thousands of men on the battlefield. Right. Like, we wore the same uniform, vastly different responsibilities. One guy cooked eggs, one guy took care of people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're not going to come into a job interview and tell you that.
Are there programs that people have started like in the private sector to make that transition smoother for training and things like that?
There is. But the problem is most of them are run by the VA, which is not the model of efficiency.
Again, that's why I said private sector.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are some, but the problem is that most of them will set it up as a nonprofit. They run out of financial bandwidth at some point because it's hard to get sponsors for certain things. And when you're living in that nonprofit world.
But like me as an employer, I would invest in something like that because I would love to bring in more veterans into my company that I knew went through a program like that. Like it'd be a recruiting hotbed. You know what I mean? Like if they were being trained how to re-enter into and how, and one other point I wanted to make before I forget it. I think that one of the reasons that stereotype exists that I lived with, right, and put everybody into this one package is because we all read the Jocko books.
Right.
And so he takes all of these amazing military conceptions and everything and then puts them into a business world that makes 100% sense. And you're like, well, if he thought that, then everybody did. And they don't. But but that's where my mind went. And I'm like, perfect. You're like, this is exactly what I want to build.
Right.
This is what I'm trying to build. So if he believes that, then every SEAL, Marine, whatever that comes out is going to obviously do it the same way.
Yeah.
Wrong.
You have to give them required reading Jocko Willink books.
I do. So I actually do that. Like that's one of the things in my business is when you come in, we do a book club. And one of the books is the first book. What's the first one called? Extreme Ownership. But then we read Dichotomy of Leadership. And then actually I forget the name of the third one, but the third one's the best one.
Is it? So I will tell you, I don't read any of that. And I'll tell you why.
Because reading's hard.
It is. I was a dumb Army guy. Here's why. Those are tier 1 personalities.
Right.
So that is 2% of the military ever.
Sure.
Are tier 1 personalities. 90% of the people reading those books are never going to be able to apply that type of strategic thinking, that type of tactical mindset, because there's a certain level of psychosis that exists in those.
Sure.
The only reason, and I saw this quote the other day, and I was like, my eyebrows went up. I was like, that's it. Psychopaths exist everywhere throughout history. Countries who win wars employ psychopaths, and that's why we don't care they're psychopaths. Look at your Navy SEAL community, your Green Berets, your Delta Force guys. Every one of those guys, if tested formally, would be a psychopath, but we don't care because there are psychopaths.
Right. You're using it for good.
And so that tier 1 personality stuff, it's the Walt Goggins, it's the Pedro Scullion, it's the Jocko Willink, all of those guys, while it's all valuable information, the reality is most people who read that stuff aren't going to apply it.
Maybe not 100%, but like even just being aware of it, I think is helpful.
And I'm not saying don't read it. I'm not saying don't read it. I think
he's saying screw your book club.
I think he is. I think that's exactly what he's saying.
Being in the military and going through the amount of combat that I went through, I don't even relate to those guys. So I'm not saying that nobody in the civilian world could. It's just not my cup of tea. I'm more of the everyman service member than the Medal of Honor winner. But then on the same breath, you have these guys like what's the rep in Texas that was in Lone Survivor?
Marcus.
Yes, that guy.
Aurelius.
Luttrell and his brother. They were both SEALs.
Okay.
And
was he the one that was buddies with Dakota Meyer?
Yes. And I have an issue when people are using that to leverage into stuff. So real quick, tell people how to find the Cult Culture Movement.
CultCultureProgram.com is how you get details on that. And Eric Oberembt, there is only one of me. You will not find anybody with my name. So if you Google Eric Oberembt, you will find me and you can reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show today. And special thanks to our last little bit of sponsors here. We have Apex Performance Chiropractic, Claim Wizard Public Adjusting CRM, and the Z Goalkeeper Academy. You can listen to us every Sunday, 5 to 6 on WFLA. Thanks for joining us. Melissa, thank you for being here. And my name is Daniel Rabowski. You have just finished listening to Boots to Business.